The usual suspects. There must always be a remedy for wrong and injustice if we only know how to find it. Ida B. Wells. On the surface, the present-day phase of humankind has nothing in common with the heartlessness and insanity of the past. For good reason, one could conclude that it should not take long mental preparation to dazzle the ancient Romans. Slaves were forced to fight to the death against another slave or a wild animal for the entertainment of the spectators. Nothing set us apart from these primitive hooligans in the way we gobble up scholarly guano. Despite the fact that the number of deities is dwindling closer to one, like money, our pretext for propitiatory child sacrifices is not far different from Moloch worshippers. Our unwavering worship of psychopath politicians, religious elitists, and boorish moneyers, or just call them deputized pricks, shows that we are still enthusiastically primitive. On the macabre global journey of integrity neutering, bright sparks are filling the universe. Social resentments have been simmering. We are phenomenally winning the fight against death. Some individuals take it upon themselves to persistently harass society's normalcy by italicizing irrationalities and brutalities. Dissenters ridicule social, commerce, and trade, and political conventions. In many ways, the history of the world is like human poop. It is simple to think of feces as the vestiges of what you gobbled up. In reality, there is more to the configuration of your dung. Excluding water, more than 50% is bacteria that have been carousing in your intestines. During the poop discharge, many of the bacteria in poop die shortly afterward. In hominid evolution, moral failings do not face the same fate. The incomplete progression is at the root of the global consciousness stagnation. Once voices for social justice gain popularity, cliques of megalomaniacs join the laypeople to hijack the celebration with an air of haughtiness. In defiance, dialecticians mitigate the impact of the mutiny on mainstream analysis and sentience. Money-eaters reproach prescient warnings as unfounded and demagogic. These are individuals and groups who greatly benefit from social and political arrangements, pervading the stench of misery. The legion of pantaloons swirls enchanting words and befuddles slothful souls, unapprised of the new paradigm shift. So as not to be outdone, one-eyed Goliaths give the impression of being relevant and more concerned with the correct literary elements than with what is being said. Meanwhile, archaeologists spend considerable time and energy searching for the oldest human feces. My contemporaries' portrayal of the world we live in has roiled the bastion of hypocrisy. Consider that, less than a century after World War II, we brazenly flirt with the absurd depiction of Adolf Hitler as a visionary and messiah. Some romantics go even further, highlighting the sanctions imposed after World War I to exonerate Germany's hell on earth and the Schutzstaffel's crime against humanity. To top these insolences, Germans of that era are, in the same fable, mocked as adolescents who innocently embraced and jubilated two cornerstones of any national sense of exceptionalism, Die Herrenrasse and Lebensraum. The implicit gullibility is inconsistent with the sustained German sentiment of racial perfectionism. In a probe of the interpretations of social dilemmas and the recommended treatments, one astutely muses about the scientific manner mix of alcohol and herbs that lumpen intellectuals indulged in before blurting out cerebral diarrhea. The stars are the ones the least comprehended and have the best arsenal of old sermons. Mysticism and foolishness have been overused to fill the sinkholes of apathy. Theological maxims are the most seductive instruments used to prolong public lassitude and are enthused behemoths' usual modus operandi in the subjugation of the masses. The extended and expanded esoteric theoretical disputes and the hebetude of universal minds keep on smashing social aspirations. In a sincere attempt to close this segment on a good note, we should pat ourselves on the back for the continued crafting of a sense of sureness. It fortifies the apathetic attitude of the public. The avalanche of assault on common sense disintegrates public appreciation and gives encouragement to insurgents. The tactic successfully contains our urge to petition for social and political changes. The inquiry into pure idiocy, like eugenics in the past, tells us one thing. The price of snubbing social mores mutinies far exceeds the cost to our collective conscience. I do not trust the slow mental process to untangle my morbid humor. In some respects, the effort to eradicate human callousness is silly. We live and die by obfuscated social, commerce and trade, and political pacts. It will be a disservice to you if I delegate to apatheists the task of disemboweling accepted norms. Be aware, as I am approaching becoming downright offensive. I did not join the resistance movement to kill people, to kill the nation. Look at me now. Am I a savage person? My conscience is clear. Salath Sar. Capitalism has been patented as the best mechanism of offering every single partaker equal rights and equal opportunities. Involuntary human servitude, slavery, was still the regular part of life for unaccredited humans when this social, commerce and trade and political arrangement erupted onto the scene. We have since given a new touch and signature mark to overextended oppression. One was to be born into slavery and die in slavery. In our time, one is to come into life in and perish in an innovative and romanticized form of slavery. On capitalism's watch, doctrinal variances and the social agony perpetual are often lost in the sea of moneyers and their devoted abettors' schemes. The list of Western elitists' deprecatory arguments of why billions of people are soaked in terrible poverty is too long. There was a time when a fair trade was a fair exchange. Westerners brought smallpox to the New World. In exchange, they got syphilis. For hipsters, the antidote to commerce and trade injustice is fair trade. None of these effete brains seem to notice critical aspects of countries on the bottom of the shit list. One which involves Western powerhouses constantly choreographing the purge of developing nations' sense of social orientation and aspirations. To think for a minute that fair trade promotes safe, healthy working conditions, protects the environment, enables transparency, and empowers communities to build strong, thriving businesses is preposterous, not to mention revolting. The fair trade crusade's single amusing exploit is the bimbo's pageantries in forgotten and forsaken parts of the world. Western governments' pervasive meddling cements the global commerce and trade status quo in weak nations' affairs. Fair trade is just another classic nauseating gimmick to secure capitalism's imperium, or, simply put, a social, commerce and trade, and political Chimoisa technique. Fair trade skullduggery pales in comparison to another tall tale, the causality between cost-cutting and prices. Production cost must be chopped to the bones in order for individuals to meet the expense of their wants to the detriment of another's. There is something wrong with the mark in the universal acceptance of this hunchback of commerce and trade. This buyer-sanctioned delusion and the tongue-tied nation's pledge to poverty conveniently flushes out any remorse while mesmerizing the pile of waste we produce. Every scheme of cost-cutting's result is surplus increase and quality decrease. Expense reduction schemes make the rich richer and cheat on the poor. It is long overdue to recognize that the cost-cutting obsession is spoiling the ecosystem and human taste. Now and then, the death toll of capitalism's disasters keeps us up at night. Melodramatic and sporadic suicides in Chinese industrial units blot out the epidemic karoshi in Japan. People are literally working themselves to death. What do the unspeakable tragedies of the 21st century Tazreen fashions factor in Bangladesh and the 20th century Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in the United States have in common? The doors to the stairwells and exits were sealed to prevent workers from taking unauthorized breaks and pilfering. Cost-cutting and fair trade moral hazard arguments have a pungent and savory flesh. Moral issues in Broglio is weighed down by crackerjack prevaricators. Considering other egregious human costs, neither Crook's conspiracies nor melodramatic factory scenes are the points of concurrency of capitalism's travesties. The capitalism poison is brewed out of trappers' primitive greed, regime's appetite for grandeur, and vulture's chick voracity. Death laid its eggs in the wound. Federico del Sagrado Corazon de Jesus Garcia Lorca. Austerity jingles and spending monkey sheens are veils for protecting the money-eater's interests. Various academic orders of knighthood tweak piles of rotting hallucinatory shreds of evidence to flaunt their amorality and arouse money-eaters. All these various and wildly divergent desperados start their ratiocination on the same decent premise. People have different gifts. From the liberal argument, they juice out a hideous moralizing discourse, which implies that money-eaters are go-getters, utilizing their innate talents. The claim of only a few chosen ones worthy of far more than any imaginary compensation adds zest to mass manipulation. Prosperity's artifices are bestrewn with banderoles crediting the free market for everything. These global affluence illusions have come to legitimize planned obsolescence. As soon the refurbished concepts fade and the world faces recurring commerce and trade slumps, moneyers bring the circus into town. Everyone gets a dozen free passes to watch clumsy blemier spending devotees pinned against maniacal styopods and austerity cliques. These eerie wrestling spectacles successfully dissolve every attempt at a sincere dialogue on surplus sharing into pretentious rhetoric. Occasionally, the austerity code of Hammurabi and spending mooring tussles spin out of control into a series of gruesome rendezvous with death. Long gone is the time when masterminds of austerity measures and protagonists of spending were physically squashed away. A tiny number of supermen, namely moneyers, have a mix of divine frugality and chromosomal predisposition to make the necessary sacrifice to accumulate stupefying wealth. Then there is the rest, ordinary mortals who do not have the aforementioned characteristics. These other humans have an inherent moral imperfection to indulge in debaucheries and go on shopping sprees that shackle them to perpetual agony. They are righteously entitled to a minuscule portion of the surplus generated from any enterprise. The nonsensicality of this tale is a blatant disregard of income accruals. Dwarfism, in contrast to their wealth enlargement haste. It is the classic case of hanging the victim. The bad news is that this corny satire, which at once glorifies and trivializes social prejudice, is a worldwide hit and too often used to smear nations and an entire hemisphere. A glance at the jaw-dropping debts of developed nations or the perplexing balance sheet of the rich debunks the abstinence myth. In fact, the entire rigged commerce and trade mechanism is fashioned to reward big spenders and to torment small hoarders. There are as much a priori truths as a posteriori argument evidencing that poor folks and shitty nations are mere bystanders to capitalism's global financial massacres. For a nation that aspires to break poverty cycle, this is a simple formula. You must spend or crook your way into the elite club of nations granted immunity against poverty. Once your financial recklessness exceeds a ridiculous level, you will get knighted as too white or too obese to go on a financial diet. Don't forget to order in the Elite Club catalog the diamond-encrusted gold ring with encryption. He who will not economize will not have to agonize. The poor people are those who suffer, are sentenced to jail, and die without shedding tears. Naji Salim Hussein al-Ali. I have this deep-seated aversion to two melodramatic phrases, "The gods have spoken," and "God in his infinite wisdom," which far exceed my distaste of the words slavery and obedience. Throughout human recorded existence, when deities are viewed as more than cavalcade mascots, terrible things happen. There is no worse irrational process or sequence of logical fallacies that is harder to break away from or to revoke once it begins with or chains its legitimacy to God. Critical thinking and debate do not involve appeals to the supernatural. As capitalism powerhouses hit the skids and Western commerce and trade stunts fall flat, Islamic economists cheered and shouted out, "I told you so." There is a paucity of evidence that calls into question the merits of the bitter Middle Eastern lumpen intellectual parade. Members of any ulema are prohibited from juxtaposing Islamic economics with conventional economics. The fear of being accused of blasphemy and mocking Islamic faith dissuade informed knockers from exposing the arrangement of cognitive dissonance. To your delight, I am a wayward social fault-finder. In accordance to my Sharia laws, juiced from an astute Persian observer's sermon, it is not worth the life of poverty for the sake of faith or ideology. I am now granting you and myself full immunity against any dialectic fatwa. An explanation of how anything works must be defensible without invoking a supernatural being. I have said it before, and I will repeat it. Socialism, fascism, and communism have failed, but now capitalism is strangling us. I have held Islamic economics' delusional parasitosis at bay in order for my anxiety and augury to reach an unbiased absolute and make this journey more intoxicating. Islamic economics is described as a vibrant set of law for settling disputes. A survey of exciting terms to enunciate on the list of sukuk like musharaka, mudarabah, shirkat-ul-milk, and skirkat-ul-aqd unveils the system's obsession with accommodating all aspects of money's stings. In fact, every sukuk has a similar tool in capitalism. Besides, the abuse and fierceness of financial instruments such as future options trading and its derivative in Islamic commercial jurisprudence are the same as in capitalism. The prohibition of riba, equating it to zulm, is the most ludicrous concept of all its charades. A revolting sentiment toward Islamic economics builds up once one realizes that the standard Islamic financing mechanisms, murabaha and ijara, which are merely rent-to-own arrangements, allow banks to charge up to 100% fixed interest. In theory, Islamic commercial jurisprudence precludes discrimination based on gender, religion, region, and ethnicity. There is nothing off about the idea that people have different levels of talent. These underpinnings are suitable for primary use in sculpting priceless and logical artifacts in a capitalistic culture. The exhibition of decorum takes a back seat when bestowed by God is added to the tale of social constructs. The rationalization of injustice is without proof to back deity directives. Islamic economics is a strong case of the demoralizing consequences of marrying political economy mantra with spirituality. The socio-threatening hyperemia in this model is anticipatable, in particular, in the way surplus is dispersed amongst active participants of an enterprise. In the Islamic commercial parable, on one side, the moneyers' gangs of Rabal Mal, Mudarib, and Karimis, because of their superhuman attributes, get their chunk of the surplus in percentage. On the other side, the Cassock and Ager live off meager residuals of the surplus. Islamic schizophrenic economics postulates that the entire planet depends on labor for survival. At the same time, it ties labor compensation to the provision of service and money or caprices. The different analysis tosses Isur, the private worker, and Isur Imstrik, the ordinary worker, into the laboring class. By disjointing the laboring class compensations from great harvests, a luxury granted to moneyers, the system subjugates Isur and Isur Imstrik to despair. If you are scratching your head trying to figure why this derangement does not sound familiar to you, well, this is the same as in capitalism. Hence, in a nutshell, Islamic economics parallels capitalism. Both ensure surplus distribution discrimination and canonize moneyers. Capitalism stretches the rights and privileges established by the Magna Carta Libertatum to barons, creatures considered humans in the 13th century and left out source. Commercial and trade circulation patterns using the teachings of Islam are embedded in similar archaic religious diktats from which human bondage customs were built on. These right refinement results were more effective at suppressing social progress. Furthermore, the undeniable sad truth punches through once the pious mascara is peeled off. Capitalism is nothing more than an Islamic economics copycat, an amoral dogma backed by theological aberrations that vindicate vassalage. More importantly, capitalism's apostles and Islamic economics disciples unrepentantly accept as true the mandatory gap between the poor and the rich to generate a harmonious social, commerce, and trade, and political arrangement in a society. Basumila Kaskia, Inch Allah. Early political economy pontiffs' tracts are indubitably persistent dialectic exertions to study carefully and thoroughly the pandemonium of production and trade. Has humanity made any progress? There is indeed a finger on the pulse of what was going on around their world. What is often forgotten is that they were more than pollsters of commerce conversion. They alerted society on social anomalies and swayed political verdicts. They bravely articulated unviable social, commerce, and trade and political frameworks that haunt us today. Their prestige also facilitated the rise of political economy within philosophy and paved the way for further developments. The cause of the social, commerce, and trade, and political periodic cyclones, and the spray of overextended misery are easily expunged if we could deadbolt absurd lips and cockamamie theories. Excommunicating imbeciles will result in nothing if we cannot dichotomize disparity and injustice. It is where the political economy has lost its virility. Since nature does not tolerate a vacuum, absurdities have filled in the proper space. So goes the finger-pointing in one direction. No matter what triggered a financial blizzard, lumpen intellectuals concoct a racketeering charge indicating the poor. For moneyers, it is the poor who are always the cause of all that comes from capitalism's troubles as well, and from the next, and so on. For laborers, it is the rich who are always the cause of every chaos as well, and from the next, and so on. Social construct anomalies are created by parasites. I do not care about any form of disparity for the simple reason that they are structural gaps inherent to nature. I cannot, per contra, hold back from shaming commerce and trade evils or single out any socio-politico deliria cases. I cannot stress this enough. We have the potential to be good or bad. Some milieus and settings are breeding grounds for the evil in all of us. The repugnant leading inequality is learned intolerance. To puke the argument with a better aroma, I shall say that injustice of any form is not a moral failing, but rather a prodrome of abysmal social constructs, such as patriarchy, theism, and every flamboyant commerce and trade awful tenet. Hence, poverty and every ism silliness are alarming signs of social pathogens. Taken in this context, by proscribing human body parts auctions, defacing Jesus Halverde shrines, shaming the Restavik institution, blowing up psycho mujahideen, oppressing Uyghurs on their ancestral land, or restyling Sakoku, we have been whipping the wrong horse on and on and on.